Whether we're talking about a business or a church, a movement, or even a nation, I think you'd agree that for whatever it is to prosper, a lot depends on effective leadership. Well, Israel is no different in this. God's people certainly had their ups and downs, but the peaks generally came when there was a strong and faithful leader holding the reins. So the book of 1 Samuel relates a really curious turn of events. In the midst of what seems to be a time of a capable and inspired leadership under Samuel, the people actually call out for an entirely new system of governance. They want a monarchy, like all the nations around them, and they want a king, like all the other nations have. It's a fascinating story, but before we dive into it, we better get a little context. So let's start back a few books in the book of Exodus, which you can date to either 1450 or 1250 BCE. Moses, an incredible leader, helps God deliver the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. And then the book of Joshua tells how Israel arrives in the territory, and under Joshua's military direction, the nation conquers the native inhabitants and takes possession of their land. We next move to Judges, which describes how for the next 200 years, Israel is this loose confederation of tribal groups without a lot of centralized leadership. The story follows 7 major figures, the judges, which is a confusing title for us. These judges are not people who deliver verdicts, but they're tribal chieftains who rise up mostly to defend the tribes against foreign invasion. In theory, the nation at this time is a theocracy, where government is by divine guidance or by officials like priests or even prophets who are regarded as being guided by God. On the whole, the book of Judges relates how the wheels pretty much come off of the entire Israel project because everyone does what is right in their own eyes, and Israel degenerates, largely due to capable leaders being so few and far between. So as the book of 1 Samuel begins, sometime around 1100 or so BCE, the nation is in pretty bad shape. There is a functioning priesthood in a place called Shiloh, where Eli the priest and his sons perform sacrifices as outlined in the Torah. But there's corruption here too. The text relates that Eli's sons are scoundrels, and they treat the Lord's offering with contempt. Not good, especially if you're a priest. And God has become distant as well. Chapter 3 begins, "In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. There weren't that many visions." This sets the stage for the appearance of Samuel. Samuel is a longed-for child born to his barren mother Hannah after she pours out her soul to the Lord in great anguish and grief, as the text relates. She does this during her yearly trip to sacrifice at Shiloh, where Eli and his sons serve. She vows to God in 1:11, "O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life." And the Lord is faithful to Hannah's grief, and she bears a son. And Hannah is true to her vow, because when Samuel is just a little guy, Hannah brings him to Eli at the house of the Lord in Shiloh, saying in 1:28, "So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord." Surprisingly, Samuel actually thrives in this setting, and things take a turn for the nation, for the better, as the boy Samuel continued to grow in stature and in favor with the Lord and with men. 1 Samuel 3:19 gives this glowing report of how the Lord was with Samuel as he grew up, and he let none of his words fall to the ground. And all Israel, from Dan in the far north to Beersheba in the far south, recognized that Samuel was attested as a prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, and there he revealed himself through Samuel through his word. What a remarkable change! With the rise of Samuel, the nation begins to turn around. The word of the Lord, which had been rare, comes frequently to Samuel, our shining prophet. But Samuel's not just a prophet. He's got a whole lot more going on. He offers sacrifices on behalf of the people like a priest. And 7:15 tells us that Samuel continued as a judge over Israel all the days of his life. That same Hebrew word, shaphat, for judge, is used like we saw it way back in the book of Judges. But the role looks really different here. He does very little militarily, but instead he spends his time hearing disputes and administering justice in a circuit that he makes from Bethel to Gilgal to Mizpah. So things seem really good, right? Well, not so much. Like many of our biblical characters, the one thing these good leaders can't seem to do is to raise sons of integrity. Chapter 8 begins, "When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges for Israel. But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice." Well, the elders of Israel see where this is headed, and so they come to Samuel in 8:4, and they say to him, "You are old, and your sons don't follow in your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." Now, it's important to understand that the people's request for a king does not mean that they don't want God leading them anymore. No ancient people of the Near East would even want this. They just want a more accessible representative, a king, rather than a prophet or a priest, so that God can be a bit more at hand when they need him, and perhaps a bit more subject to their own agendas. The elders' request also tells us a lot about how governance is working behind the scenes here. We see that Samuel has some serious clout. The leaders can't enact this national change on their own. They need for it to come through Samuel. But I also have to ask, where have these elders been up to now? Doesn't it seem a little drastic for them to propose an entirely new system of how the country governs? Are they just now awakening to what leadership is going to look like when Samuel dies and his corrupt sons take over? Have they been asleep at the switch? Or could it be that they've approached Samuel before now with their concerns about the boys? Did they find him to be unresponsive and unyielding? Is this maybe a last resort for them? Either way, in 8:6, it says that Samuel is displeased. The Hebrew text says the thing was evil in Samuel's eyes. The elder's request is a criticism of both Samuel and the system he represents. The Lord, though, seems to tell Samuel not to take this too personally. It's me who they're rejecting, he tells them. If we pay close attention to how both Samuel and God react to the people's request for a king, though, I think we uncover something that becomes important to how the story is going to go forward. Samuel, for his own reasons, really doesn't want Israel to become a monarchy. It's a blow to him personally. From now on, it's likely that it won't be Samuel who the elders approach about national issues. It's going to be the king. His vision of his sons inheriting his position and his influence dissolves as well. He's also got some very legitimate concerns on the national level about the king's largely unchecked power. He tells the people how a king will take from them. And he literally uses the word take or tithe, which is to take a tenth, 6 times in 8 verses, as he describes to them what their future king will do. God, for his part, also doesn't want a monarchy, but I sense something different about his response. He tells Samuel 3 times that he needs to listen to the people and hear and grant their request. He seems to be saying, yeah, I don't love this turn of events either, but it's not unworkable. My central desire for covenant connection with these people is still achievable, and they can still be a light to the nations around them to show them who I am. That's the thing that I'm most concerned with. They want a king to be like all the other nations, which is the opposite of my call for them to be uniquely Israel. But a king of justice and mercy and faithfulness just might be able to show the world that even monarchy can work if the monarch and the people love God with all their heart and soul and strength. Sure, things just got a lot tougher, but God is not thwarted. He's still in. He's still for them. This isn't plan A, but truthfully, they obliterated plan A a long time ago back in Genesis. So God is undaunted by their request for a king. So Israel is to be a monarchy, like all the other nations, where the king will be God's representative on earth. It stands to follow, then, that the man chosen to be king is absolutely critical. Join in next time, and we'll find out all about him. So thanks for coming along on this short journey into the Bible text. I hope you've noticed something new in the landscape, or maybe even a fresh way to view territory that you've covered many times before. Whatever the case, it's good to have you along for the trip. You never know what we might discover as we crack open this fascinating text together.